He stopped for gas. She stopped to cry. One moment of kindness from a single dad turned into a life neither of them saw coming, but everything they both had been praying for. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The kitchen buzzed with barely controlled chaos. Jack moved with the kind of efficiency that only came from too many mornings exactly like this one. Half toast in his mouth, coffee brewing too slowly, and one sock on. The other sock? Somewhere in the universe, probably in the same black hole that swallowed Tupperware lids and matching mittens. Emma, 7 and stubborn, sat at the counter with a wrinkled school worksheet and a spoon hovering over her cereal like it was radioactive. "Dad, I can't find my glitter glue, the sparkly one." Jack passed by her with a plate of eggs and a distracted, "Use markers. Glitter glue's banned at school, remember?" "That was last year," she fired back, eyes narrowing, as if the rules of elementary school could change like the weather. She shoved the worksheet aside and sulked into her Cheerios. Jack let out a sigh, ruffling her hair as he passed again, this time finally wearing both socks. "We're going to be late, Em. Let's not go into meltdown over sparkles today." The truth was, Jack didn't mind the chaos, not really. It filled the silence, the kind of silence that had hung too heavy after Laura died. Some mornings it still crept in, especially when Emma would forget and set out 3 plates instead of 2, then pause, confused, before quietly putting one back in the cupboard. Jack remembered those moments with a pinch in his chest. He tried not to linger on them. Today was one of the better days. No tears, no reminders, just glitter glue drama and lukewarm coffee. He poured the coffee into his travel mug, took a sip, winced, burned. Typical. "Backpack, coat, shoes. Check," he called, moving toward the door, keys in hand. Emma jumped down from the stool and grabbed her oversized unicorn backpack. "Can I play the dinosaur song in the car? If we get out the door in the next 60 seconds, you can play it twice." That got her moving. She bolted for the door, nearly tripping over the dog, who gave them both a weary side-eye from the hallway. Jack paused, scanning the kitchen one last time. Half-eaten breakfast, a spilled cup of juice, and her abandoned worksheet. It looked like a mess to anyone else, but to him it was life. Fragile, messy, loud, and still going. He locked the door behind him, not knowing the day ahead would be the one that changed everything. Jack hated this stretch of road. 2 lanes, cracked pavement, and not a damn thing around but flat fields and telephone wires. It was the kind of road where silence got too loud. Emma sat in the back, singing softly to her tablet, her mismatched socks peeking out from her car seat straps. They were running late. Again. The gas light blinked orange. Jack cursed under his breath and took the next exit, coasting into the first gas station he saw. It wasn't much, a rusted sign that barely read Shell, 1 lonely pump, and a convenience store that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since Clinton was in office. He pulled up, threw the truck in park, and stepped out. The morning air had that strange spring bite, sunshine without warmth. He swiped his card, watched the pump blink to life, then glanced at his watch. 20 minutes to make it to work if traffic stayed light. It wouldn't. Inside the truck, Emma knocked on the window and waved at him with a crumpled napkin. He smiled without thinking. Then he saw her. 2 rows over, next to the air pump, a woman stood beside a dusty old sedan with the hood up, blonde hair tied up in a messy bun, oversized sweatshirt swallowing her frame. One hand pressed to her forehead, like she was trying to hold in her sanity. Something about her didn't fit. She looked out of place, like she belonged somewhere with coffee shops and bookstores, not stranded outside a broken-down gas station with the wind slapping at her sleeves. Jack looked away, then back. She wasn't on her phone. No call for help. Just standing there, jaw tight, chest rising like she was trying not to break down. The pump clicked, gas full. He could have gotten back in the truck, driven off, left her to figure it out. It wasn't his problem. But there was something in the way she looked at that engine, desperate, cornered, like she'd run out of road. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, sighed, and muttered, "Come on," to himself, before walking over. He had no idea what he was about to step into. Claire had been staring at the engine for 20 minutes and still had no idea what she was looking at. It could have been a rocket ship for all it meant to her. The hood stood open like a question mark, and the air around her smelled like old oil and burnt rubber. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from everything else. From the miles behind her, from the phone call she didn't return, from the panic pounding in her chest like it was trying to escape. She hadn't planned to end up here, not this gas station, not this town, not this moment, stranded beside a sputtering car and an air pump that looked like it hadn't worked since Reagan. A single tear slid down her cheek before she could catch it. She wiped it away fast, frustrated with herself. "Come on, Claire, get it together." But her voice cracked halfway through the pep talk. The tears kept coming. The car had been making that noise for hours, a soft thump-thump, like a heartbeat that didn't want to be heard. She'd ignored it, just like she'd ignored the texts, the calls, and the voice in her head that kept asking where exactly she thought she was going. All she knew was she had to leave, she had to run, and she had. But now the car was dead. Her phone was at 10%, and she had no one to call even if it was charged. Not anymore. Not after the things she'd said, not after the way she left. Claire dug into her purse, fingers fumbling for something, anything, that could give her control. A tissue, maybe. Her keys. A piece of gum to occupy her mouth so she wouldn't scream. She felt eyes on her. A quiet wait. She looked up. A man stood a few feet away. Tall, brown hair mussed, one hand in the pocket of his flannel jacket, the other holding a set of keys. He wasn't staring, he wasn't gawking. Just watching her the way someone might look at a wild animal, cautious but concerned. She blinked at him, cheeks flushed, suddenly aware of how ridiculous she must look. Red eyes, smeared mascara, car hissing like it was in pain. "Need some help?" he asked gently, like he already knew the answer. She opened her mouth, but no words came, just a shaky nod. And just like that, something shifted. Jack approached slowly, not wanting to spook her. There was something raw in the way she stood, hands clenched into the sleeves of her sweatshirt, shoulders pulled up like she was bracing for a blow. She looked like someone who didn't trust much anymore, especially not kindness. He glanced at the tire, flat, nearly off the rim, a small jagged nail still embedded near the edge. The car itself was old, faded blue, and held together by more hope than metal. Definitely not making it anywhere in that condition. "You've got a flat," he said gently, crouching to get a closer look, even though it was obvious. Sometimes naming the thing out loud helped settle the air. "Do you have a spare?" She hesitated, blinked a few times like she'd forgotten how to speak. I think so," she said finally, voice hoarse. "I don't know how to check." "No problem," Jack replied, keeping his tone light. "Mind if I take a look in the trunk?" There it was again, that pause. A flicker of hesitation behind her eyes, like she was measuring risk. He didn't blame her. A stranger at a gas station offering to poke around her car. It sounded like the beginning of a true crime podcast. But after a long breath, she nodded and fumbled for the keys, handing them over with fingers that barely let go. Jack moved to the back, popped the trunk, and found the spare. Old, dusty, but usable. As he rolled it out, he could feel her watching him, trying to figure him out. He set to work in silence, pulling the jack from his truck and easing the car up. Emma peered from the window of their own vehicle, nose pressed against the glass, eyes wide with curiosity. "I can pay you," the woman said suddenly. Her voice was more solid this time, but there was a crack under the surface, fear disguised as formality. Jack shook his head without looking up. "You don't need to. It's just a tire." She was quiet after that, watching as he worked, her arms wrapped around herself, knuckles white against her sleeves. It wasn't just the car that was broken, and Jack, without quite knowing why, wanted to fix more than just the flat. The spare was on. The old tire, bent and useless, sat beside the curb like a dropped shield. Jack wiped his hands on a rag from his truck, glancing at the woman leaning against her car. She looked better upright, but only just, still pale, still like she might bolt at the wrong word. "Should hold until you get somewhere with a proper garage," he said, offering a tentative smile. "You heading home, or—" Claire looked away, toward the road, then up at the open sky like it might have an answer. Her arms stayed crossed over her chest, tight and defensive. "I'm not really heading anywhere," she said softly. Jack waited, not pushing. Silence had a way of coaxing the truth out of people when you let it. "I've just been driving," she said after a pause, voice caught somewhere between shame and exhaustion. "Since yesterday morning, no GPS, no map, just roads, any road that looked like it went far." He nodded slowly, staying quiet. Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. "I needed to leave. I didn't even pack a bag, just grabbed my purse and keys and left." "Left what?" Jack asked gently, but she flinched at the question like it had claws. "Everything," she said quickly. Then, after a beat, "My fiancé, my life, I guess, or what was supposed to be my life." Jack leaned back against the car next to her, close enough to be present but not crowding her space. Emma had gone back to her tablet, oblivious to the emotional minefield 20 feet away. Claire rubbed her temples, eyes glassy. "I kept telling myself it was fine, that I was lucky. He was successful, smart. Everyone said he was a catch. But I was drowning, and no one noticed, not even me. Until yesterday." She laughed once, bitter and small. "I don't even know what I'm looking for. I just knew I couldn't stay there another second." Jack didn't speak right away. He didn't offer cliches or silver linings, just stood beside her in the quiet, let her words settle in the space between them like dust. Sometimes, he knew, getting lost was the first honest thing a person could do. Jack was about to offer Claire a bottle of water from the truck when he heard the window roll down behind him. "Daddy?" Emma called softly. He turned. She sat perched in her booster seat, knees tucked up to her chest, her chin resting on her folded arms. The tablet lay forgotten beside her, and her eyes, big and round and unfiltered, were fixed on Claire. Jack walked over and leaned through the window. "Yeah, baby?" Emma glanced at Claire, then back at him, whispering now, "Does the lady need a friend too?" Jack froze, heart catching in his throat. He glanced back at Claire, who was now sitting on the curb with her elbows on her knees, staring at the gravel like it held a map she couldn't read. "I think maybe she does," he said quietly. Emma's brow furrowed. "She looks sad like you looked that time in the kitchen when I came in and you were holding Mommy's mug." Jack swallowed hard. He remembered that morning too well. He'd thought Emma was still asleep, had let his guard down for just a second. But nothing got past her. She didn't miss things. She stored them, like puzzle pieces she hadn't figured out where to place yet. "Can I say hi?" she asked. Jack hesitated. Claire wasn't some stray cat they could bring inside and fix with warmth and apple slices. She was a grown woman, with bruises you couldn't see and wounds that probably hadn't stopped bleeding yet. But he also knew Emma's heart, and how sometimes kindness, coming from a child, cut deeper than anything an adult could offer. "Okay," he said gently, opening the back door. Emma hopped down and walked over, small sneakers crunching softly on the gravel. Claire looked up just as Emma stopped in front of her. "Hi," Emma said, offering the kind of simple smile adults forget how to wear. "I'm Emma. Do you want to be friends? My daddy makes good pancakes, and we have crayons." Claire stared at her, stunned. Then something broke in her face. A crack, then a tremble. Her hand came up, brushing a tear from her cheek. She let out a laugh that sounded more like a breath she'd been holding too long. "Yeah," she said hoarsely. "I think I'd like that." The tire was on, the tools packed up, and the air between them hung heavy with the weight of things unsaid. Jack stood by the truck, arms crossed, watching Claire brush a loose strand of hair behind her ear as she slid behind the wheel. She still looked tired, like someone who'd been walking through a storm, soaked through, but too stubborn to stop. Emma waved from the passenger side, cheerful and unaware of the undercurrent. Claire gave a soft wave back, her smile small and crooked, fragile. Jack cleared his throat. "That tire should hold for a while. There's a garage about 15 miles down Route 6. Honest guy, name's Dave. Tell him Jack sent you. He'll take care of you." Claire nodded, gripping the steering wheel. "Thanks for all of this." He wanted to say something more, something useful or comforting or brave, but everything that came to mind felt either too much or too little. So he just nodded. Claire looked down at the dash, then up again. "I'm not really sure where I'm going after that." Jack let a beat pass. "That's okay. Sometimes not knowing is better than heading the wrong way." It landed. He saw it in her eyes, a flicker of something that might have been gratitude, or maybe grief, or both. She turned the key. The engine stuttered, then caught. Jack stepped back. Claire rolled down the window, resting her arm on the edge. "If you ever, I don't know. If you need help with something," she started, but trailed off. The sentence didn't really make sense, and they both knew it. He smiled just a little. "I've got it handled." That made her smile too, for real this time. It lasted 2 seconds, then she nodded and pulled away. Jack stood there long after the car disappeared down the road. The quiet settled in, not the peaceful kind, the kind that reminded you someone had just left, and you didn't know why it felt like more than it should. He walked back to the truck and slid into the seat beside Emma, who was now drawing in her notebook. "She was nice," Emma said. Jack didn't answer right away. He just stared out at the road ahead. "Yeah," he said finally. "She was." Jack didn't notice it until he pulled into the hardware store parking lot 10 minutes later. It was wedged at the base of his windshield, just beneath the wiper, small, battered, leather-bound. At first he thought it was Emma's, one of her sketchbooks, but the weight of it in his hands said otherwise. It was heavier somehow, personal. He flipped it open. The first page held no name, no address, just a single sentence in careful handwriting. "What am I even looking for?" Jack paused, then turned another page. Inside were scribbled notes, half-finished lists, little sketches in the margins, trees, roads, street signs. One page had the word "escape" written over and over again until the ink bled. Another listed places like she was trying to draw a map without a destination. Boone, Crestview, maybe Raleigh, maybe nowhere. He closed the notebook gently, throat tightening. It wasn't just a journal. It was a breadcrumb trail through someone's unraveling. Claire hadn't just been driving, she'd been falling. And this was everything she was trying not to say out loud. He leaned against the side of the truck, the weight of the notebook resting in his hand. Part of him knew he shouldn't have read a word of it. It wasn't his. But another part of him couldn't ignore what it meant. Claire was searching, not for a place, but for permission to stop running, for something safe, or someone. He looked down at the worn cover again, thumb tracing the corner. A name would have made this easier, a number, something to say. "Here's how to find me again." But there was nothing. Emma climbed out of the truck, holding a crumpled dollar bill. "Can I get a soda from inside?" Jack nodded absently. "Yeah, go ahead." His eyes stayed on the notebook. For a second he debated tossing it in the glove compartment and forgetting it altogether. Maybe she'd realize it, come back for it. Maybe she wouldn't. But Jack knew the truth in his gut. This notebook wasn't just something Claire left behind. It was a part of her. And something about that made him feel like she hadn't really gone at all. The notebook sat on the kitchen counter all evening, like it was watching him. Jack tried to ignore it, made dinner, cleaned up after Emma, even fixed that loose cabinet hinge he'd been meaning to tighten for 2 weeks. But every time he passed by, the little leather book pulled at him, quiet and insistent. By the time Emma was in bed and the house had gone still, the silence pressed in like fog. Jack poured a cup of tea he wouldn't drink, sat at the table, and pulled the notebook toward him. He opened to the middle, half expecting it to bite. The pages were a tangle of chaos and clarity, scattered words written in different pens, lists that seemed hopeful until they unraveled into uncertainty. One page simply read, "Do not go back," in thick black ink, underlined 3 times. Another held a list titled, "What I Hope to Find." Jack read it slowly, line by line. Peace, a reason to wake up early, a bookstore with a cat, a kitchen that smells like pancakes, someone who listens, not just hears, listens. He paused at that last one. Claire hadn't said much at the gas station, but this was everything she didn't know how to say. He turned another page. There were hand-drawn maps, some almost childlike, others surprisingly detailed. None were labeled with town names, just cryptic titles, the place with red trees, good coffee maybe, too quiet. Then he stopped on a sketch, a lighthouse. It wasn't perfect, but it was careful. Detailed lines, storm clouds in the background, waves crashing hard against the rocks. The words beside it read, "I don't even know if this place is real, but I dream about it." Jack stared at it longer than he meant to. A lighthouse in a storm. Maybe it didn't matter if it was real. Maybe what mattered was that she needed it to be. He closed the notebook, hands lingering on the cover. He'd never met someone and thought about them this much after a single conversation. But Claire wasn't just someone. She was looking for a lifeline. And Jack realized, maybe without meaning to, that he didn't want to be the guy who let go of the rope. The diner was half full, buzzing with the low hum of forks against plates and a jukebox stuck in the 90s. Jack sat in a booth near the window, sipping his second cup of coffee and flipping through emails he had no real interest in reading. Emma was across from him, distracted with a coloring menu and a pile of broken crayons. It was supposed to be a quiet breakfast before errands. Nothing special. Then the bell over the door jingled. He looked up without thinking, and froze. Claire stood in the doorway, looking like she'd walked straight out of a dream and hadn't quite figured out if she was welcome. Her hair was tied back this time, a little neater, but her eyes were the same, tired, wide, uncertain. She wore a different sweatshirt, same kind of lost. Jack couldn't tell if she saw him at first. She scanned the diner like she was hoping to find a quiet corner where no one would notice her. Then their eyes met. She stopped mid-step, one hand still on the door, like she was deciding whether to stay or bolt. Emma noticed first. "Daddy, that's her. That's the friend lady." Claire's lips parted in surprise, then curved into the faintest smile. Jack stood up, gesturing toward the booth. "We've got room if you're hungry." She hovered a second longer, then finally exhaled and walked over. "I was just looking for coffee," she said, half laughing like she needed an excuse. "Didn't know I was walking into fate." Jack chuckled. Small town, limited options. Claire slid into the booth, the space suddenly feeling too full and too quiet all at once. Emma immediately pushed her crayons toward her. "You can color if you want. I'm doing a dinosaur, but it looks like a potato." Claire gave a soft laugh. "Potatosaurus. Very rare." Jack watched the exchange, something warm stirring in his chest. She looked different today, not healed, but maybe like someone who'd taken one deep breath after a long time of drowning. As the waitress poured her coffee, Claire glanced at Jack. "You still have it, don't you?" He didn't have to ask what she meant. He nodded. Didn't feel right to throw it in a drawer. She looked down at her hands. "It's weird. I think I left it on purpose." Jack waited until the waitress walked away with their empty plates. Claire had barely touched her eggs. Emma had devoured her pancakes and was now off at the jukebox with a quarter and big opinions about which song to pick. The diner had emptied out a bit, leaving a quiet lull around their booth. Jack reached into his coat, pulled out the journal, and set it gently on the table between them. "I think this is yours," he said. Claire stared at it like it might bite her. Her breath caught, her hand hovering just above the leather cover, but not quite touching it. "I wasn't sure you'd notice it was gone," Jack added, voice low. "I noticed," she said, almost a whisper. She finally let her fingers land on it. "I tore the car apart, looking for it last night. Thought I left it at the motel. I almost gave up." He watched her eyes soften as she ran her thumb across the spine, like she was reacquainting herself with something she hadn't realized she'd missed until it was gone. "I read a few pages," Jack admitted, not apologizing exactly, but not proud of it either. Wasn't trying to pry, just didn't know what it was at first. Claire didn't look angry. If anything, her expression cracked with something deeper. Not betrayal, something closer to relief. That someone had seen it, really seen it. "Then you know," she said softly. "I wasn't just out for a drive." He nodded. Claire sighed, resting both palms on the table. "It's like I spilled everything into that book because I didn't trust anyone enough to say it out loud. And now someone else knows the mess I'm in." "I don't think it's a mess," Jack said, choosing each word carefully. "I think it's someone trying to breathe again." She blinked, and her lip trembled before she caught it with her teeth. "That lighthouse in there," she murmured. "I don't even know if it exists. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, it's all I can see." Jack leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice steady. "Maybe it doesn't matter if it's real. Maybe it's about what it means." Claire looked up, and something in her face shifted. Like maybe, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't ashamed of needing to be found. The coffee turned cold long before either of them noticed. Refills came and went. Emma eventually fell asleep curled in the booth, her little head resting on Jack's jacket like it had always been hers. The late morning sun shifted through the window, catching in Claire's hair, and still she talked. Not in one long monologue, but in pieces. Carefully at first, like pulling threads from a too-tight sweater. Jack said little, just listened, the kind of listening that made silence feel safe. "I wasn't escaping a town or a job," she said finally, eyes tracing the rim of her mug. "I was escaping him." Jack didn't have to ask who. Her voice said it all. "We were engaged for 9 months," she went on. "He was charming at first, the kind of guy who knew what wine paired with what meal, who remembered your co-workers' names to impress you, who left flowers on your desk." She smiled faintly, bitter at the edges. But it changed, slowly, in ways you don't even recognize until you're already explaining bruises to yourself like they're your fault, or telling your mother you just fell into a door. Like that even makes sense. Jack felt his jaw clench. He said nothing. She needed to keep going. "He never hit me in the way people think of when they hear that word, just enough to confuse me, just enough to make me feel small, like I should be grateful he stayed." Her voice cracked then. She looked up, blinking hard. "I wasn't running from a place. I was running from becoming someone I didn't recognize, from forgetting who I was before him." Jack reached for the creamer, giving her a moment. His fingers brushed hers, and neither of them moved. "I packed my keys and wallet and left while he was at work," she whispered. "Didn't even take a toothbrush. Just drove." Jack finally spoke. "You were brave." Claire laughed under her breath, the sound hollow. "I didn't feel brave. I felt like a scared little girl with a full tank of gas and no plan." He looked at her, really looked, and said quietly, "Sometimes that's exactly what brave looks like." Jack stared at the condensation trailing down the side of his water glass, his thumb slowly circling the rim. Claire had gone quiet, her story poured out and sitting raw between them. He hadn't meant to say anything. Usually, he didn't. Most people didn't ask. And when they did, they got the short version, clean, edited, palatable. But something about her cracked something open in him, too. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he said, voice low. Claire's eyes lifted, soft but surprised. "Cancer," he continued, "ovarian. We caught it too late. She was 35. The words tasted familiar and foreign all at once. He hadn't said them out loud in months. "She was quiet but fierce," Jack added, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Loved thunderstorms and red wine. She hated musicals, but would sing every word of Les Mis if it came on. Claire smiled, a sad kind of smile, and Jack went on. She held it together better than I did, even when her hair fell out, even when she knew what was coming before I let myself believe it. He paused, swallowed. I didn't know how to breathe without her. For a long time I didn't try very hard. Emma got me through. She was 5 when it happened. Too young to understand, but old enough to know something had changed. She kept asking when Mommy was coming back from the stars. Jack blinked quickly, willing the pressure behind his eyes to ease. He wasn't going to cry in a booth across from a woman he barely knew. It's strange, he said finally. You wake up one morning and there's just quiet. Not silence exactly, just the absence of the life you built. And you start wondering if maybe this is it now, this hollow version, the leftovers. Claire reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. I get that, she whispered, more than I wish I did. They sat like that, two people who had lost different things in different ways, quietly recognizing that grief wasn't always about what was taken, but about what was left behind. It was later that night, after dishes and stories and the kind of quiet that only settled once a child was finally asleep, when Jack found the drawing. Claire had stayed for dinner, just grilled cheese and tomato soup, nothing fancy. But the way she smiled when Emma offered to split her sandwich made something in Jack's chest tighten, like watching a door open he hadn't realized was still closed. Emma had been unusually focused after they ate, head bent over the kitchen table, with crayons scattered around her like confetti. She hadn't said what she was working on. Jack hadn't asked. Now, with the house dim and still, he saw the paper left behind on the table, surrounded by stray reds and blues. He picked it up gently. It was crude, like most of Emma's drawings, stick figures and bright colors, the proportions off, but the heart unmistakably clear. 3 figures. Emma easily recognizable with her wild brown curls and a big happy smile. Jack, taller, arms wide, the words Daddy printed across his shirt in pink crayon, and Claire. Her stick figure stood beside them, holding Emma's hand on one side and Jack's on the other. She wore a long purple dress, the kind Emma always gave her princess people. Above her head, scrawled in a messy loop, was the name Claire in glitter pen. The 3 of them stood beneath a crooked sun, a rainbow overhead, and a little house in the background with a heart drawn in the window. Jack stared at it, the air in the kitchen going still. It was innocent, sweet, the kind of thing a kid drew without thinking, without overanalyzing. But it said more than Emma could have explained with words. To her, Claire wasn't a stranger anymore. She was someone who belonged. He felt a shift then, deep and unspoken, like something fragile had quietly taken root. And with that came fear, just enough to sting. Because he wasn't sure if Claire would be here tomorrow, if this, whatever this was, had space to grow. But he folded the drawing carefully, like it was something sacred, and tucked it into the drawer beside the fridge, just in case. The screen door groaned on its hinges as Jack pushed it open, holding it back for Claire, who stepped through carrying a toolbox nearly half her size. She was already smudged with dirt, knees streaked, a faint line of sawdust across her cheek, but there was something steady in her movements, focused, determined. I still think you're letting me stay here out of pity, she said, setting the toolbox down on the porch with a soft thud. Jack shook his head, wiping his hands on a rag. I'm letting you stay, because you're the first adult conversation I've had in months who doesn't think I'm a tragedy in jeans. That made her snort. Flannel, actually. He smiled, then handed her a screwdriver. Think you can handle replacing a window latch? Claire nodded, biting her lip with mock seriousness. If I fail, I demand toast and sympathy. The guest house wasn't much, just a 1-bedroom out back that hadn't been used since Jack's brother crashed there during a messy divorce 3 years earlier. But it had heat, plumbing, and a door that locked. And for Claire, it might as well have been a palace. They worked side by side, fixing things that had been broken so long Jack had stopped noticing, peeling paint, a loose step on the porch, that door in the laundry room that never quite shut all the way. Claire didn't complain, not once. She didn't shy away from splinters or rusted nails or the occasional spider. She just worked. And in the quiet hours between repairs, she talked. Not about her past, not yet, but about books she loved, the way she missed thunderstorms, the time she almost got arrested in college for painting murals on abandoned buildings. Jack listened, hammer in hand, and let her voice fill spaces that had echoed for too long. By the end of the day, the latch was fixed, the porch step no longer wobbled, and Claire's laugh had slipped out without her permission. As the sun dipped behind the trees, she stood with him on the porch, watching Emma chase fireflies. "Thanks," she said quietly. "For what?" he asked. "For not asking me to leave." She paused. "And for letting me feel useful again." Jack nodded. "We all need a reason to stay sometimes." The mornings blurred into something close to rhythm, not quite routine. Routine still felt like too strong a word, but there was a flow to things now, a quiet stitching together of moments that felt less like coincidence and more like belonging. Claire was up before Jack most days, already halfway through making coffee by the time he stumbled into the kitchen. She'd hum to herself as she cracked eggs or sorted through Emma's lunchbox, like the sound helped hold her together. Jack never said much in the mornings. He wasn't wired for conversation before caffeine, but her presence had a way of softening the edges of his silence. Emma, of course, had no sense of boundaries. By the end of the first week, she'd declared Claire an official helper, which apparently meant she was required to join in everything: school pickups, snack selection, reading the same book 3 nights in a row until the characters lived in their dreams. Claire didn't resist. If anything, she leaned in more than Jack expected. She memorized Emma's bus schedule, knew which socks made her itchy, which fruit roll-ups she'd trade away at lunch. She fit into the pockets of their life not like a stranger squeezing in, but like someone uncovering a shape that had always been there. One night, Jack walked into the living room to find Claire sitting cross-legged on the floor, Emma curled against her side, both of them locked into a storybook adventure about pirates and talking cats. Emma's voice chimed in to correct Claire's pronunciation of the Pirate Queen's name, and Claire, mock-scolded, bowed her head in defeat. Jack stood in the doorway and watched, heart tightening in a way he hadn't prepared for. It wasn't just Emma who needed this. Claire did too. The laughter, the simplicity, the grace of small, ordinary things. After Emma went to bed, Claire lingered at the sink, washing dishes like it was her own home. Jack dried, silent at first, then said, "You don't have to do all this." Claire shrugged. "I know, but I like it. It feels safe." He met her eyes. "You're allowed to have safe now." And in the stillness between them, it felt true. Maybe, for the first time, for both of them. It crept in slowly, the way most dangerous things do, quiet, patient, disguised as something harmless. Jack first noticed it in the space between sentences. The way Claire would brush a hand through her hair when she was thinking, or how she laughed a second longer when Emma said something ridiculous. It was the kind of noticing that sneaks up on you, the kind that makes you start looking without meaning to. She'd sit on the porch swing some evenings, barefoot, reading from one of Emma's books like it was poetry. And Jack would find himself lingering in the doorway, arms crossed, pretending he was checking the weather or some chore left undone, anything to justify staying close. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, something real. And that's what scared him. He'd been here before, in a different life, with different hands holding his. He knew what love felt like, and he knew what losing it did to a man. That kind of grief wasn't something you just filed away. It etched itself into your bones. So every time his heart beat a little faster when Claire laughed, He forced himself to breathe through it. Every time her hand brushed his when they passed each other in the kitchen, he pulled away too quickly. She was healing, still walking barefoot over broken glass. The last thing she needed was a man who couldn't decide whether he was ready or terrified. One night, they sat on the back steps after putting Emma to bed, watching the stars emerge one by one. Claire had her knees drawn to her chest, sipping tea from the chipped blue mug Jack always forgot to replace. "She asked me today if I was her stepmom," Claire said softly. Jack looked over. "What did you say?" "I told her no," she said. Then, after a beat, "Not yet." The words landed hard in his chest. She didn't look at him, and he didn't answer. He couldn't. The air between them tightened with all the things they weren't saying. Jack wanted to reach for her. He didn't. Instead, he stared out at the sky, heart full, hands still, and let the moment pass. Claire was in the kitchen when the knock came. 3 hard, impatient raps on the front door that didn't match the usual rhythm of delivery drivers or friendly neighbors. Jack was outside with Emma, fixing the broken garden gate. She wiped her hands on a towel, heart skipping for no reason she could name, and pulled open the door. Then her breath left her like a punch. It was him. Derek stood on the porch in his designer coat and polished shoes, completely out of place against the chipped paint and wildflowers by the steps. His hair was too neat, his smile too sharp. He looked exactly the same, and yet somehow more dangerous in the quiet way a memory becomes a warning. "Claire," he said, as if they'd seen each other yesterday, as if she hadn't vanished without a word. "There you are." She stepped back instinctively, one hand gripping the edge of the door. "What are you doing here?" Her voice trembled despite her best effort to keep it strong. He didn't answer right away, just looked past her, into the house, like he expected to see her suitcase by the door, ready to come home. "It took some digging," he said finally, "but you left enough breadcrumbs, motel receipts, a card charge at a gas station, and then this place. Small towns don't keep secrets well." Claire's stomach dropped. "I just want to talk," Derek said, holding up his hands like a peace offering. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." Behind her, footsteps. Jack appeared in the hallway, dirt on his hands, brows knit with quiet alarm. "Is everything okay?" he asked, voice calm but firm. Derek's smile dropped a notch. "And you are?" "Jack," he said, stepping forward. "Claire's friend." Derek looked Jack over, a flicker of contempt passing through his eyes. "I didn't realize she needed rescuing." Claire's chest tightened. "I don't." But the truth was, she did. She just hadn't expected the past to knock this loud, or to find her somewhere she almost felt safe. Derek leaned in slightly. "Let's not forget who you are, Claire. You think this life suits you, but we both know better." Jack stepped closer, his voice low, steady. "I think it's time you left." Claire's fingers curled tighter around the doorframe, her pulse loud in her ears. She wasn't ready for this confrontation, but maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face it alone. Derek didn't move. He stood just outside the threshold, the kind of man who mistook control for charm, silence for compliance. Claire felt frozen, like the version of herself she'd worked so hard to peel away was clawing its way back to the surface. Her feet stayed rooted to the floor, but her hands trembled, hidden in the folds of her sweater. Jack didn't say another word at first. He just moved, not aggressively, not in a way that escalated, but with the calm certainty of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to make a point. He stepped in front of Claire. The space between Jack and Derek narrowed to a breath. Derek smirked, as if amused by the audacity. "This is cute," he said, looking past Jack, straight at Claire. "Playing house? Come on, Claire. You think this guy understands you? You really think this is your life?" "She's not going anywhere with you," Jack said, voice low, every syllable deliberate. "You don't get to show up here and pretend she owes you something." Derek's jaw tightened. "This is between me and her." "Then you shouldn't have left her shaking at the door." That landed. Claire didn't speak. She couldn't. The tightness in her throat felt like it might choke her. But she stared at Jack's back, how solid he looked, how grounded, and for the first time in a long time, the fear didn't swallow her whole. "I'll call the sheriff," Jack continued, "and I know him personally. If you're still on this porch in 60 seconds, you'll be explaining why you're harassing a woman who clearly doesn't want you here." Derek's expression flickered. He wasn't used to being denied. But even he could see it. This wasn't a man bluffing. Jack wasn't a threat. He was a wall. After a long pause, Derek backed up, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. "You'll come to your senses," he said to Claire, his voice colder now. "You always do." Jack closed the door without a word. Inside, the silence was deafening. Claire exhaled, knees weak, heart pounding against her ribs. Jack turned to her, his eyes steady, but softer now. "You don't have to go back," he said. Claire looked at him, and in the depth of his gaze, she believed it. For once, someone wasn't standing in front of her. He was standing with her. The next morning, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that presses down on your shoulders without you realizing it. Claire stood on the back porch, a cup of coffee warming her hands, staring out at the yard, where Emma was chasing the dog in circles, laughter echoing like it belonged there, like she belonged there. The night before had left a heaviness in her chest, not fear exactly, but weight, a reckoning. Derek was gone, but his presence still lingered like smoke. She could have packed her things after dinner. Jack would have understood. He wouldn't have asked questions. But instead, she'd cleaned the dishes, tucked Emma in, watched Jack silently pull an extra blanket from the closet and leave it folded at the edge of the guest bed. Not because she needed warmth, because he wanted her to feel safe. She hadn't felt safe in years. Jack appeared behind her now, quiet footsteps on the wooden planks. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, his arm brushing hers as he sipped from his own mug. "I know you probably feel like you should keep going," he said finally, "that you've still got something to outrun." Claire didn't look at him. "I used to think if I stopped moving, he'd catch up to me, that standing still meant surrender." Jack nodded slowly. "What does it mean now?" She swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the little girl in the yard who had already redrawn what family could look like. "It means I'm tired," she said, voice steady, not of hiding, of pretending I don't want more. Jack looked at her, really looked, eyes full of cautious hope. She turned to meet his gaze, coffee cradled in her hands like it was the only thing anchoring her to the ground. "I want to stay," she said, and the words didn't tremble. "Not because I'm scared or lost or don't have somewhere else to go, but because this feels like choosing something good, something real." Jack didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. He just nodded quietly, like he'd known this was coming all along. And for the first time, Claire didn't feel like she was asking permission to exist. She felt like she was home. The smell of kettle corn and wood smoke hung in the air like memory. Strings of lights zigzagged over the town square, casting a warm glow over hay bales, scarecrows, and hand-painted signs that read, "Welcome to the Maplewood Fall Festival." Kids ran in packs with painted faces, their laughter slicing through the folk music drifting from the bandstand. Claire had never seen anything so unapologetically wholesome in her life, and she loved it. Jack walked beside her, a soft plaid blanket folded over his arm, Emma skipping ahead with a caramel apple, half destroyed in one sticky hand, and a prize ribbon flapping from the other. "Third place in the pumpkin toss," she'd shouted earlier, eyes lit like she'd won the lottery. Claire had cheered just as loud as Jack did, maybe louder. They found a spot on the grass beneath an oak that had already shed half its leaves, and Jack spread the blanket like a man who'd done it 100 times. Claire sat down next to him, close enough for her knee to brush his. She didn't move. "Small-town festivals are kind of a big deal here," Jack said, smiling as he handed her a cup of cider. "We get serious about our pie competitions." Claire laughed. "I noticed. Someone in the bake-off tent was practically crying over a dropped crust." Last year, a fistfight broke out over spiced pecan. Sounds violent, she teased. You should have seen the frosting incident in 2019. They laughed together, and it felt easy, natural, like something built, not borrowed. Emma came barreling back with 2 tiny pumpkins, one for each of them. We're a team, she declared, plopping them down. A family team. Claire's heart twisted at the word. Jack looked at her, his expression soft but unreadable, and in that moment, surrounded by strangers who felt like neighbors, wrapped in the scent of cinnamon and something sacred, Claire felt it too, not like a replacement, not like an escape, like a beginning. She watched Emma lean against Jack, eyes fluttering from too much excitement. Claire reached for his hand, quietly, like a decision she wasn't scared of anymore. He didn't flinch. He held on. The night settled in with a kind of softness that only comes after a day so full it left no room for worry. Jack drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely in his lap, fingers still faintly sticky from cotton candy. Claire sat beside him, her eyes heavy, lips curved in a quiet, content smile, as she looked out at the dark country road. Emma was in the back seat, half asleep, but still buzzing, her voice just above a whisper. "Daddy?" Jack glanced in the rearview mirror. "Yeah, bug?" Emma yawned, curling up against her booster seat like a cat. "Is Claire going to be my new mommy?" Silence fell, heavy and immediate. Claire's breath caught. Jack's hands tensed on the wheel, and for a full 3 seconds, no one said a word, just the low hum of tires against asphalt and the chorus of late summer crickets. Emma didn't say it like a challenge. She wasn't testing waters. She asked it like someone who'd drawn her own conclusions and just needed to know if the adults were on the same page. Claire turned slowly, meeting Jack's eyes for a moment before looking back at Emma. The little girl was blinking up at them, calm and unblinking, trusting. Jack's voice was rough when he finally spoke. "That's a big question, Em." Emma nodded. "I know, but she's here now, and she makes pancakes almost as good as yours." Claire swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Sweetheart," she began, but faltered. How do you answer that? How do you tell a child you're not a replacement, not a promise, but a person just trying to find her way? Jack stepped in. "Claire's really special to us, and we love having her here, but being a mommy, that's something we'd all have to talk about when we're ready." Emma considered this like it was a math problem. "Okay," she said simply, then leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. Claire stared at the dashboard, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I wasn't expecting that." "Neither was I," Jack murmured. But neither of them said they didn't want it, and maybe that said everything. The next morning, the house was too quiet. Claire stood at the sink, her hands submerged in soapy water, but the plates had been clean for 10 minutes. She was just standing there, lost. The smell of coffee hung in the air, untouched. Outside, Jack's truck pulled out of the driveway with Emma in the passenger seat, off to school. Claire had waved, smiled even, but the second the taillights disappeared, the weight in her chest came crashing down. She wasn't ready. The words had been clawing at her since Emma's question. Is she going to be my new mommy? They echoed in her mind like a stone bouncing inside a glass jar, sharp, loud, never quite landing. She wasn't a mother. She wasn't even stable. She had no job, no plan, a broken car in the driveway, and a trail of bruises she still hadn't finished tracing. What if she was pretending? What if this warmth, this home, this man and his daughter, what if it wasn't hers to hold? The fear hit in waves. She dried her hands and walked to the guest house without thinking, started folding her clothes, even though most of them were already in drawers. She zipped her backpack halfway, then unzipped it, pacing like something inside her was trying to escape. Jack had given her nothing but kindness, but that made it worse. He was steady, solid, the kind of man who showed up. She didn't know how to exist in that world without ruining it. And Emma, God, Emma. That child looked at her like she was someone worth becoming. and Claire wasn't sure she could survive failing her. Her fingers shook as she gripped the edge of the dresser, breathing fast. This wasn't like running before. Back then, she'd been in survival mode. Now it felt like sabotage, tearing something down just before it got too good. Because if she stayed, she had something to lose, and losing it would break her in ways Derek never could. Claire sat down on the edge of the bed, eyes burning. She wasn't sure what scared her more, leaving, or daring to believe she could stay. Jack found her in the guest house just after sunset, sitting on the edge of the bed like she was bracing for an earthquake. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The room looked like a storm had passed through it, drawers half open, a jacket folded the wrong way, the faint hum of a bag being packed before it was unpacked again. He didn't knock, just opened the door and stood there until she looked up. "I was going to leave," she said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't, but I almost did." Jack stepped inside, quiet, careful. I figured something was wrong. Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all day. "I don't know what I'm doing. One minute I feel like I'm part of something here, like I'm building a life. And the next, I'm terrified it'll all collapse if I lean too hard." Jack sat across from her, not too close. "You're not the only one scared." She looked at him then, really looked, into the eyes of a man who had already lost everything once, who had rebuilt something fragile and was now watching her teeter on the edge of it. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I panic. I overthink. I push people away when I feel something too strong. I don't know how to be a mom or a partner or even a person who belongs in a place like this." Jack didn't flinch. "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Claire." She blinked, stunned by the simplicity of it. "I'm not looking for a replacement, not for Laura, not for some picture-perfect family. I'm just looking for something honest, something real, even if it's messy." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't have to be ready. You just have to stay. Not because you feel guilty or because Emma wants you to, but because you want to. That's it." Claire's lips trembled, and for a second she didn't speak. Then, quietly, "I don't know if I can do it right." Jack gave a small, steady smile. "Then we'll figure it out wrong, together." And somehow that felt like enough. The wind off the water was colder than Claire expected, sharp against her cheeks, but she didn't care. Her fingers were tangled with Jack's as they made their way up the winding path, boots crunching over the gravel and sea-worn grass. Emma had stayed behind with a neighbor, content with movies and popcorn, giving them space neither of them had asked for, but both knew they needed. The lighthouse came into view slowly, a white tower against the gray sky, weathered but standing tall, just like in her sketch. She stopped walking. Jack looked over, waiting. "I used to dream about this place," she said, "before I ever saw it. I'd draw it over and over without knowing if it was real." He didn't ask how she'd found it or why it mattered. He just squeezed her hand a little tighter. They kept walking until they reached the edge of the bluff. The lighthouse loomed beside them, its windows fogged and its light, unused now, dark and still. Below, the ocean stretched wide and wild, slamming against the rocks like it was trying to get in. Claire wrapped her arms around herself, eyes on the horizon. "I used to think if I could just get here, wherever here was, I'd be okay," she whispered. "Like I could outrun everything if I had a destination. Some finish line where the pain would stop following me." Jack stood beside her, quiet. "But it doesn't work that way, does it?" she said, voice cracking. "It comes with you, the fear, the memories, even the parts of yourself you wish you could forget." A tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. She didn't wipe them away this time, didn't try to make it look pretty. Jack didn't speak. He didn't pull her in or tell her to be strong. He just stood there, shoulder to shoulder with her, while she cried for everything, what she'd lost, what she'd survived, what she was still afraid to hope for. And then, just as suddenly, she laughed. It wasn't loud or forced. It was raw, broken at the edges, but real. She turned to him, eyes wet, mouth pulled into something halfway between joy and disbelief. "I found it," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "My lighthouse." Jack smiled, wind tossing his hair. "Looks like it found you, too." They sat on the cold stone steps of the lighthouse as dusk began to settle, the sky painted in muted streaks of lavender and gray. The wind had died down, just enough for the world to feel still, not silent, never truly silent with the ocean breathing below them, but still in that sacred kind of way that invites something honest. Claire's shoulder rested lightly against Jack's. Neither of them spoke for a long time. It had never been about grand gestures for her, not anymore. She'd had flowers without apology, rings without meaning, promises that glittered like glass until they shattered. She'd had men love the idea of her, what she looked like on paper, what she could be molded into. But Jack? Jack had loved her gently, patiently, without asking her to be anyone but the trembling, rebuilding version of herself. "I used to think love had to be loud," Claire said softly, watching the last stretch of sun vanish into the sea. "That if it wasn't wild and all-consuming, it wasn't real." Jack didn't answer, not right away, just let her speak. "But this," she continued, "whatever this is, it's different, it's quiet, it doesn't pull me apart, it makes me feel like I can breathe." Jack turned to look at her. The light from the tower flicked on, casting a gentle glow across his face. He wasn't smiling, but his expression was full, soft, open, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "I love you, Claire," he said. No tremble, no hesitation, just those 4 words, like they'd lived in his chest for a while now, and finally found the air they needed. Her breath caught. He didn't fill the silence after. He let her have it. Let her hold the weight of his truth without expectation. Claire reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I love you too," she whispered, "not because I need you to fix me, but because you don't try to." And there, under the lighthouse light, 2 people who had both been broken, different shapes, different scars, finally fit. Not perfectly, but fully. And that was enough. The "For Lease" sign in the dusty window had been there so long, the letters had started to fade. Most people passed the little storefront without a second glance, just another forgotten space on Maplewood's sleepy Main Street. But Claire had noticed it every time she walked by, and today she stopped. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside, the air thick with dust and potential. The hardwood floors creaked under her boots. The walls, cracked in places, still held the faint outlines of old shelves. It smelled like old paper and stale coffee, but to her it smelled like beginning. She stood in the center of the room and closed her eyes. She could see it already, bright white walls with soft light spilling through the front windows, easels lined up along one side, shelves stacked with sketchbooks, brushes, ink pots. She imagined Emma sitting in the corner with her crayons, Jack leaning against the doorway with coffee in hand, watching her work like it meant something, like she meant something. Claire signed the lease that afternoon. By the following week she was painting the walls herself, splashes of color she didn't bother to tape off, letting the strokes go wherever her hands needed them to. She wanted it to feel alive, imperfect, honest. Word spread fast in a small town. The locals were curious. First, the baker's teenage daughter wandered in after school. Then the librarian asked about beginner watercolor classes. Before long, Claire had a calendar full of names she didn't know yet, but wanted to. Jack helped hang the sign out front. North Light Studio. "Why North Light?" he asked as he tightened the last screw. Claire looked up at him, then out at the sky, already beginning to shift with spring. "It's what artists call the best light to paint in," she said, soft even, no harsh shadows. He nodded, understanding more than the words. She reached for his hand. "It's also the direction I was heading when everything started to make sense." And this time she wasn't passing through. She wasn't running, wasn't searching. She had unpacked. She was staying. The dining table was covered in glue sticks, construction paper, and a chaos of colored markers. Claire sat with her elbows on the edge, watching as Emma carefully pressed down a cutout leaf with her little fingers, tongue poking out in concentration. Jack leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, sipping coffee and quietly admiring the storm of creativity overtaking his house. "Okay," Emma said, holding up the page. "This is the last one." She reached for the glue and stuck a final paper leaf to the base of the tree, a big lopsided oak she had drawn in bold green crayon. Names were scrawled in each branch: Grandma Lucy, Uncle Ben, even Mommy Laura, whom Claire had helped her write, in soft cursive. Claire hadn't known how much to help, where to step in, but Emma had done it all without hesitation. Everyone had a place. At the very bottom, the trunk split into 3 smiling stick figures, each one with a name scribbled above it: Jack, Dad; Emma, me; and then, in slightly smaller handwriting, but the same bright red marker, Claire. No label, no footnote. Just Claire, part of the root. She stared at it, something tightening in her chest. Not from pain, but from the unmistakable feeling of being seen. Included. Chosen. Emma slid the paper across the table, proud. "My teacher said we could do any kind of family tree. Doesn't have to be just blood stuff. So I did the real one." Jack moved behind Claire and rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. She looked up at him, then back down at the paper. "You even gave me eyelashes," she said, trying to keep her voice light, though it cracked at the end. Emma grinned. "Because you're the prettiest." Claire laughed through the ache in her throat. Jack's fingers squeezed gently on her shoulder. For so long, family had been a word Claire tiptoed around, a word that meant obligation, or pain, or pretending. But here, in marker and glue, it was simple. Not perfect, not planned, just real. Family, as it turned out, was something you could grow into, even if your roots started somewhere else.